Well, thank you, Secretary Wilson. That was awesome. And good morning, everyone. It is an honor, it's a pleasure to be here to participate in this national dialogue with you on a topic that is so crucial to our collective success. I especially want to thank Secretary Spencer, Secretary Esper, and Secretary Wilson for hosting this event and bringing us all together. Admiral Carter and the team here at the Naval Academy for serving as site hosts, and the planning team led by the Department of the Navy Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office for putting together such a thoughtful agenda. And so it's great to be with you here this morning. So we are convened to talk about sexual assault and misconduct at our nation's colleges and universities and service academies, and the role that our institutions play in working to combat it. It is a topic that is central to our ability to fulfill our academic mission and the ability of our students to thrive. And yet, if you were to have said to me 40 years ago at the outset of my academic career that I would be delivering a keynote address on this topic, I would surely not have believed you. Indeed, my training in mathematics covered much different topics on things that inspired me to pursue a career in the academy: excellence in teaching and research, experiential learning, understanding the truly transformative power of a college education. But here I am today for the same reason that all of you are, to learn from each other about a topic that, for most of us, falls far outside our area of expertise. And we're here not only because we care deeply about the safety and success of our students, but also because we know that our institutions cannot maximize their academic excellence unless our campuses are safe, equitable, diverse, and inclusive. So, in truth, today's topic sits right at the core of why I chose a career in higher education, and I expect the same is true for almost all of you. So, I was asked to talk about Dartmouth as a case study, to share with you the story of how Dartmouth came to be where we are today, openly and actively confronting sexual assault and violence on our campus. And it's a story that's far from over, still being written, but my plan today is to briefly describe what we've done, what's been successful and what's not been successful at this point, and then to leave plenty of time to open up for all of you to weigh in with questions or insights after I also share what we've learned. So I think I forgot my clicker. All right. Awesome. So I'm going to talk about three major initiatives that we've undertaken at Dartmouth in the last 5 years. Moving Dartmouth Forward was the first one. It was launched in January of 2015, and it was really focused on eliminating harmful behaviors within the undergraduate social scene. So it was focused really on undergraduates. Inclusive Excellence was launched about 18 months later, and it was focused on diversifying faculty and staff and building a more inclusive community. And then lastly, our most recent initiative, the Campus Climate and Culture Initiative, launched earlier this year, which seeks to reduce or eliminate gender harassment, sexual misconduct, and abuse of power differentials on campus. So we think of these three initiatives, which are actually complementary in scope, as actually part of a comprehensive package. As I talk today, no single action we've taken is by itself new or innovative. So as you look at what we've done, I think the lessons to be learned here are from how we put these actions together in an effort to create a campus that is diverse, inclusive, equitable, and safe. Now, these three major initiatives, they have a few things in common. First of all, each consists of a set of concrete actions, 1 to 2 dozen in each case. But ultimately, we are shooting for something much bigger when we do these things. Our ultimate goal is not just the actions, but for the actions to ingrain more positive practices and behaviors into the culture of our campus. So it's actions leading to culture change. In each case, the initiatives were designed by a task force, which spent up to a year developing the architecture of the initiatives. By the architecture, I mean the set of actions we're going to be taking, the metrics of success, and the type of oversight that would ultimately assure accountability. And these task forces, they took an evidence-based look at the current situation. They harvested our ideas from within our campus and within our alumni community. And they scoured the higher ed landscape for best practices, recognizing, of course, that what works well at one campus may not work well at ours. In the case of moving Dartmouth forward and inclusive excellence, the first two of the initiatives, the task forces were internal. For the Campus Climate and Culture Initiative, the third one, we took advantage of a task force that had been convened by the National Academies. So another feature that these initiatives share is that in each case, we put in place an independent external advisory board reporting directly to the Board of Trustees. So the job of these boards is to evaluate, first of all, are we taking the actions that we promised to take? And are these actions having the desired effect? In each case, the advisory boards were chaired by someone with no affiliation to Dartmouth. In the case of moving Dartmouth forward, this board was chaired by Larry Backow, who recently, of course, stepped down from this esteemed role, given that he's got new duties as president of Harvard. For Inclusive Excellence, the board is chaired by David Carrion Bradley, who many of you may know. And in the case of the third initiative, the Campus Culture and Climate Initiative, the board is chaired by Gilga Barabino, Dean of the Grove School of Engineering at City College. And as I said, those chairs have no affiliation to Dartmouth, and several of the board members also have no affiliation to Dartmouth. So we really wanted them to be independent. These oversight boards, they'd help us understand what is or is not working, and in realistic terms. And they've also contributed to the campus and alumni belief in what we're doing. So they brought credibility. Another commonality is that in all these initiatives, data monitoring, transparency, and accountability are essential components of the work. So each initiative has a website, of course, and on that we post all data we collect that's relevant to the initiative, as well as any reports, including those made by these oversight boards to the trustees. So those are commonalities of the initiatives, and before I dive into each of them individually, let me give you a little history of how we came to be launching these initiatives. So when I became president of Dartmouth in 2013, the trustees were deeply concerned about the long-term relevance of the institution. So they certainly understood that Dartmouth remained a highly successful institution with accomplished faculty and outstanding students. But at the same time, the trustees saw some storm clouds. They heard too many stories of harmful student behaviors on campus, stories that caused them deep personal distress, but also distress as fiduciaries of the institution. And also, as fiduciaries of the institution, they saw indicators that this unhealthy campus climate was causing Dartmouth to lose ground in academic quality and reputation to our peers. To give you some examples, in admissions, our yield being the fraction of students admitted who choose to enroll, so our yield was stuck around 50%, which is near the bottom of the Ivy Plus group. And in the wake of a damning expose in Rolling Stone in 2011 on hazing practices within the Greek system at Dartmouth, our undergraduate applications dropped in the next couple of years by 14%. The campus was under active investigation by the Office of Civil Rights. High-risk drinking and sexual assault and violence were the major focus of discussion on campus, crowding out talk about academics. And Dartmouth was getting hammered on social media. So that was my welcome as I arrived at Dartmouth. The institution was literally at a crossroads of sorts. It's a pivotal moment in which change was necessary to reach our potential. So we needed to create an environment where students were free of extreme behaviors and part of a safe and healthy community. We needed to foster inclusivity by providing a variety of options for community building and social interaction. And we needed to engage our students in learning 24/7 and lessen a bifurcated culture in which the residential and academic lives of our students were entirely separate from one another. So shortly after my arrival, we began an 8-month planning process led by a task force of students, faculty, staff, and alumni. And based on their recommendations, we launched Moving Dartmouth Forward in January of 2015. It was an initiative aimed at reducing extreme harmful behaviors within the undergraduate student experience, with high-risk drinking and sexual assault front and center. So what were the pieces of this initiative? Some of the higher profile ones. First of all, we instituted a ban on hard alcohol on campus. So we knew from data that first-year students were the most at risk from excessive alcohol consumption, accounting for over half of our alcohol-related transports. The most significant issue with those first-year students was pre-gaming, consumption of hard alcohol behind closed doors in their residence halls before they went out for the evening. And so one of the main objectives of the hard alcohol ban was to reduce this pre-gaming behavior, not just the consumption, but the supply of hard alcohol by upperclassmen. On the sexual assault front, we adopted an external investigator model for serious assault allegations and instituted mandatory expulsion for those found responsible. So there were no options in sanctioning. Expulsion was the only possibility. At the same time, we expanded our bystander intervention and other tactics to encourage students to look out for one another. And we committed to develop a mandatory sexual violence prevention program for all undergraduates that extended the education we had been doing during freshman orientation to a comprehensive 4-year curriculum. And as an aside, given where we are, I should note that we adopted the idea of a 4-year curriculum from today's hosts, the U.S. Naval Academy. So thank you for that. Next, we undertook the most fundamental transformation of residential life at Dartmouth since coeducation. So specifically, we created a house system, like many of our peers have, within our residential model. And the goals here were to build greater community within our residence halls, to better connect students with faculty, to create options for social engagement outside of gender-dominated social spaces, and inject more intellectual content into the residential lives of our students. So this was a big deal, expensive, will take a long time to fully implement. And then finally, the other highlight I'll say from Moving Dartmouth Forward is that we made clear that all student organizations, including our Greek houses, would be held to higher standards, and that any organization that did not live up to those standards would no longer have a place at Dartmouth. So at Dartmouth, students have a long tradition of independently organizing and defining the social scene on campus. It's something they take great pride in. And we felt that we could not enact meaningful reform if we upended or threatened that tradition. And to the contrary, we wanted student organizations, including Greek houses, to be allies in this work. I would say by and large that's worked out. Greek houses actually have led with significant reforms in how they train their new members around these issues, in restricting access by freshmen to their social events, and by engaging safer practices around how they host events. And for those houses that were not on board, we took action. We have permanently closed 2 that have been most recalcitrant, including in a Nixon goes to China moment, my own fraternity from when I was an undergraduate at Dartmouth. So those are some of the highlights. Moving Dartmouth Forward is a little more complicated than that, but those are some of the highlights. And so what are the results we can report at this point, 5 years out? And let me share a few outcomes. So after the implementation and announcement of the hard alcohol ban, we have seen a dramatic drop in the number of students self-reporting hard alcohol consumption. And specifically in anonymous surveys, students report about a 50% decrease in levels of hard alcohol consumption following the ban. So what you're seeing up here is a graphic. It's from anonymous surveys. It's the fraction of our students who report having consumed hard alcohol within the last 2 weeks. And so this is where Moving Dartmouth Forward was kind of the initiative was first rolled out. here's where the hard alcohol, right in the middle of that year is when the hard alcohol ban actually was put in place. And so you can see the fairly dramatic decline in self-reporting hard alcohol use. Similarly, the number of alcohol-related medical transports and the number of medical transports where students have a high blood alcohol content, they stand about half of what they were before Moving Dartmouth Forward was initiated. So if I showed you those, they would look very similar to this. In addition, our bystander intervention initiatives, they seem to be having a notable traction. In the 2015 survey conducted by the AAU, the Association of American Universities, Dartmouth students reported the highest rate of bystander intervention among all the institutions surveyed. And specifically, 57.7% of Dartmouth students reported taking some action when they saw someone acting in a sexually violent or harassing manner, compared to 45% of students nationally. So those are good news things. On the still challenging front, the number of self-reported incidents of sexual assault from anonymous surveys remains unchanged. So we have not seen movement in that. We've seen increase in reporting, but not movement in the anonymous surveys. And I would say the extent to which students are embracing the new house community system remains mixed at this point, with strong engagement by the younger classes, but more ambivalence by juniors and seniors. And so I think it's going to take a while. It's going to probably take a decade before we understand the extent to which the transformation of residential life is having a desired effect on the campus culture. And lastly, let me just return to admissions, since that was one of the motivations here, and how has admissions fared in the wake of major reform in the social scene. And this is a good news story. In the years since we launched Moving Dartmouth Forward, our yield has risen dramatically from 50%, which had been historically, to 64% last year. And our application numbers have rebounded from the 14% drop to be now at all-time highs. So there were, of course, students, there were alums who feared that the hard alcohol ban and the other steps would chill admissions, but I can emphatically report that they have not. Quite the contrary. So that was Moving Dartmouth Forward, the first of the three initiatives, again launched in January of 2015. It got us off to an energetic start, particularly at addressing harmful behaviors on campus. But we still face very significant challenges on diversity and inclusion. There is and remains a huge disconnect between the diversity of our student body compared to that of our faculty and staff. In 2016, 40% of our undergraduate student body self-identified as people of color, compared to 17% of our tenure and tenure-track faculty, and the staff figure was even lower at 8%. So 40% for students, 17% for faculty, 8% for staff. At the same time, a campus climate survey showed that underrepresented communities and a measurable portion of our staff felt unsupported and excluded on campus. So to address these issues, we convened three working groups to focus on diversity and inclusion for faculty, one for staff, one for students. Each group presented a set of recommendations for ways in which we could create a campus environment in which we all felt welcome and valued and diversity could thrive. And the work of these task forces led to the development of our action plan for inclusive excellence, the second of the initiatives launched in May of 2016. So it focused on these three key areas: diversifying the faculty and staff, creating an inclusive environment, and transparency and accountability. So on the first point, on the diversifying faculty and staff, we did a number of things. The provost added central resources to aid in the hiring of faculty who could bring diversity to their departments. There's nothing like money. We expanded the employee support networks that helped underrepresented groups create connections and build community at Dartmouth. We set up diversity advocates to work with all of our search committees to help identify candidates that are underrepresented in their fields. So there is an office in the provost's area. It's led by a faculty member. A bunch of students work there, and for every faculty search, it scours the nation, tries to find high-performing, diverse faculty that they can, in the area where the search is, that they can recommend to the search committee. We've implemented implicit bias training for everyone involved in the hiring, tenure, and promotion processes. So that includes not only the search committees, but our deans, our central tenure committee, the president and provost, and even the board of trustees. We've created postdocs with tenure lines attached in fields where there's a diverse applicant pool. The idea here is to try to give those faculty a leg up the way that you do in the sciences when you have a postdoc, to get them ready before they take on all the duties of a tenure track line. To help promote more inclusive behaviors, we're asking the arts and sciences faculty to institute an undergraduate course requirement on human difference. And we're growing the number of programs we offer to faculty and staff on modeling inclusive behavior and working effectively across difference. So this initiative, Inclusive Excellence, it's a little younger than Moving Dartmouth Forward, but what can we say by way of results? On the faculty and staff recruiting front, it's really very encouraging. I'm surprised by the success. In each of the last 2 years, over half of our faculty recruits have been faculty of color. And that puts us back on track to achieve our 10-year aim of reaching 25% faculty of color by 2027. On the staff side, we've also made notable gains with the percent of underrepresented groups up 3 percentage points to 11%. In the last 3 years. So a long way to go. We've got to be unrelenting in these efforts, but at least we're seeing initial progress. On the more challenging side, the efforts by the arts and sciences faculty to agree on a distribution requirement around human difference seems mired in bureaucratic purgatory. Those of you who work with faculty will understand this. So I won't say much more about inclusive excellence, except to point out that diversity and inclusion, including gender diversity, they're fundamental to our ability to create a campus environment where gender harassment and sexual misconduct are not tolerated and where survivors are fully supported. So inclusive excellence is in fact, relevant, very relevant to the topic of today, I think. So that was our second initiative, Inclusive Excellence. About a year after the launch of Inclusive Excellence, we got a wake-up call. We received the first allegations from graduate students of egregious sexual misconduct by 3 faculty members in our Department of Psychology and Brain Science. And Secretary Wilson alluded to this earlier. While a trained external investigator dug into the allegations, the faculty members were put on paid leave and prohibited from entering campus or attending Dartmouth-sponsored events. When the investigator reported, the findings of the investigation led us to pursue tenure revocation proceedings against all 3 faculty members, all of whom eventually resigned unconditionally from employment at Dartmouth. This incident, and others like it across higher education, motivated us to ask, how can we more effectively prevent gender harassment, sexual misconduct, and especially abuse of power differentials on our campus? So that was the origin of a third and final initiative, the Campus Climate and Culture Initiative, or C3I, which was launched in January of this year. So with C3I, we're taking aim at sexual harassment and abuse of power with a particular emphasis on relationships between faculty, staff, postdocs, and graduate students, so as not to duplicate the undergraduate-focused efforts we've already taken with Moving Dartmouth Forward. So the C3I is really in the faculty, staff, postdoc, graduate student space. In designing C3I, we were trying to figure out what action should we take, what steps should we take. We had the immense good fortune that the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine had just issued a landmark report entitled Sexual Harassment of Women, Climate, Culture, and Consequences in Academic Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And for those of you who have not looked at that report, I highly recommend it. It's evidence-based, it's thorough, it's comprehensive, it's hard-hitting. So we turn to that report as the essential framework for C3I. Dartmouth is embracing all of the recommendations for institutions of higher education put forward by the National Academies in that report. So every one of them, and we've added a couple of other steps for good measure. So our approach is threefold. We're trying to address campus climate around gender harassment and power abuse. We're trying to disrupt traditional power hierarchies through diverse recruitment and professional development, and we're enhancing the resources available for support. So let me say a little bit about those in turn. First, we are supplementing our traditional academic reviews of departments and programs with separate reviews of department climate. Now, what is it like to work and study there? Do graduate students feel supported? Do staff feel bullied? Are complaints addressed? Are they even heard? So to help us develop a climate review capability, we've engaged Abby Stewart, who I think probably many of you know or know of her. She's a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, a national expert in creating inclusive academic environments. And Abby's going to work with Vicki May, who is a professor at Dartmouth, to build within our campus the expertise and staff who can lead climate reviews of all academic units going forward. So these reviews, they're not only going to give us baseline understanding, but they're going to reveal areas in which we need to improve. So again, not a new innovation for Dartmouth, but part of a comprehensive package. At the same time, we are creating a uniform sexual misconduct policy for all of Dartmouth, as opposed to the previous piecemeal plans, one for faculty, one for staff, and one for students. So we're going to have a single uniform policy. We're going to maintain separate procedures for each, and we are streamlining the procedures, significantly streamlining the procedures for investigating and adjudicating allegations of sexual misconduct against tenured and tenure-track faculty, including our processes for tenure revocation in these instances. Separately, a Policies in Action working group is helping us identify other policies and practices we might employ to mitigate or prevent abuse of power differentials across the institution. So taking direct aim at power differentials. On the training front, we've initiated mandatory Title IX training for all faculty, staff, postdocs, and grad students to ensure clear and consistent understanding and expectations. And those of you who work with faculty will realize it's really quite bold to make them do something. But at this point, I'm happy to say we launched this in January. We're at about 91% completion across campus. Beyond that, we are creating leadership training programs specifically for department heads and those running labs and research groups. Our goal is to ensure that everyone who occupies a supervisory role, deans, academic department chairs, directors, faculty members, principal investigators who manage other researchers, have the tools to create an inclusive environment and understand power dynamics and how to exercise power responsibly. Concurrently, we have made research advisory committees mandatory for all graduate students so that they can no longer have just a single person as their advisor. They have to have an actual committee. We want every graduate student to have a relationship and feel comfortable talking to multiple mentors. We're enhancing our resources for compliance, outreach, prevention, and support. We are further expanding our Title IX office in recognition of the pivotal role it plays, and we're adding additional mental health counselors and survivor advocates on campus. And then finally, we are part of the National Academy's Action Collaborative to share ideas and best practices across institutions. So that's our third initiative, C3I. It's really early days. It was just launched in January, so there isn't much by way of results to share at this point, but I'm really excited about what this may bring to our campus. So that's a lot of detail, I realize, and it's early in the morning. which I apologize for. But I hope it gives you a sense of the scope of what we've done. You know, just if you don't remember the details, just think about the breadth and the multiple directions that we've used to approach these issues. And now I want to turn and say a little bit about the lessons we've learned along the way, because with every one of these initiatives, we've learned a lot. So, first, and this is really the point I was just making, it's deeply embedded in our approach, issues surrounding sexual misconduct, campus climate, power dynamics, they're complex. No single action or intervention is going to contain the consummate solution. You need to tackle these challenges comprehensively and from multiple directions. There are many factors at play in influencing behaviors, and each of which requires deliberate and concerted effort in order to enact change. Second, keep your community informed and believing in your efforts. When addressing issues surrounding climate and misconduct, you know, it's really all about the decisions made by individual community members. So they really need to be involved in designing the solutions. And students in particular can be very powerful in this way. Many of the student reforms instituted at Dartmouth were designed or initiated by the students themselves. They were actively involved in revising our alcohol management program, which are the rules in place when there's a social event serving alcohol. They were involved in developing our Inclusive Excellence Action Plan and in designing our new residential house system model as well. Third, you have more allies in this work than it sometimes feels. It can feel pretty lonely doing this kind of stuff. Critics are often loud and outspoken, whereas those who are supportive tend to whisper, has been my experience. For example, you would be hard-pressed to find a student at Dartmouth who will, in front of their peers, say they're supportive of the hard alcohol ban. But in private conversation, many, many of our students say the campus is calmer and feels safer as a result of the ban. Fourth, employ external experts, not just to design your efforts, but to assess your progress. You're not in this alone. There are people out there who are highly experienced and highly knowledgeable, and take advantage of them. Outside experts bring critical knowledge, they bring fresh perspectives to bear on our initiatives, and at the same time, they provide us with a hard constraint every year to demonstrate progress when they come to do their reviews. Additionally, external review committees provide an excellent check on internal groupthink. And at Dartmouth, having external review committees by our side has given our full community the assurance that we will indeed be held to task. So they lend credibility to your efforts. Fifth is data. Collect and analyze data to guide your actions, and at the same time, understand the limits of data in this area. There is absolute value in taking a data-driven approach to problems, but it's also equally important to recognize that data can be imperfect. For example, we all know that sexual assault is vastly underreported. Challenges with self-reported sexual assault data arise from definitional differences as well, and similar challenges exist around climate data. As a scientist, you know, I realize that there is usually no control group for your efforts around sexual assault or any of these topics. And so assigning causality is really difficult. But that said, I'm a numbers guy, right? I'm a mathematician. I believe in data. And as long as you're realistic about its limitations, and as long as you look for qualitative measures to help evaluate attitude and behavioral change, really you should use it. It lends lots of belief and credibility to what you're saying. Six, communications and transparency is paramount. And even process-oriented communications, which can be very tedious, they're important. So I'd say this is an area where we've struggled at Dartmouth, so we're better at it today than when we first began this work. One of the mistakes, one of the traps we fell into is we were not sufficiently attentive to the fact that memories are short and especially so in a campus where the population turns over pretty quickly. So just, for example, I was surprised in working with a student group last year that they had heard of moving Dartmouth forward, but they actually had no idea of what was involved. And then, of course, it dawned on me that, yes, of course, because none of them were actually enrolled when we launched Moving Dartmouth Forward. So it was time to remind them. And so it never hurts to repeat a message. And in addition, get comfortable with communicating difficult news from the top. And when you can't say more for legal reasons or otherwise, do your best to explain why you can't say more and when you may be able to say more. Seventh, this is one I think you all know. Tackling these issues is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's particularly true on university and college campuses and probably in the service academies as well, where change is hard at these places. I think you probably all know the old expression that universities are where glaciers go to rest. But, it is important because what we're after here is institutionalization, not just initiatives. And so the most important thing to remember is to keep your eye on the prize and to clearly identify achievable interim tasks that will get you towards your goal. And finally, appropriately acknowledge the past, but keep your focus on the future. What we're really doing here is we're trying to build a better future. This is our 250th anniversary at Dartmouth. It's been a great opportunity to remind ourselves that we are a dynamic institution, that we are a work in progress, even at 250 years old. We are a place that at times falls short, as human institutions inevitably do. But we're always evolving. We're striving to do better. So, I guess the advice here is we mustn't be afraid to acknowledge our mistakes of the past and how these missteps have made us wiser about the future. So, eight lessons learned from our experience. So, I know I've given you a lot to digest and think about, and I'm going to stop here in a moment. I'm going to open it up for questions and discussions. Before I do, I'm reminded of something that Larry Bacow says, which is that, working on these issues, the issues of campus safety and equity and inclusivity and diversity, they are more like conditions to be managed than diseases to be cured. This work never ends. We must always continue to do this work, but let me say that despite that, it gives me great hope for the future to look out at all of you and see so many academic leaders who care as deeply, and military leaders, about these issues as I do. So if there's one thing that's clear is we cannot, coming back to where I started, we cannot achieve our highest aspirations as individuals or institutions without eliminating the behaviors that cause the most harm to our communities and inevitably hold us back as institutions, as academic institutions. So thank you for dedicating yourselves to this work and inviting me to share some of my experiences today, our experiences at Dartmouth. And now I'm delighted to welcome your questions and thoughts for a few minutes. So thank you. So questions?
Military academies be having no alcohol policy, and even in the military environment is hard to. My question is, how has Dartmouth enforced their policy?
Yeah. Okay, Robert. Thank you. Great question, and I, I thought someone would ask, what does it mean to ban hard alcohol on campus, right? What it means is the following. What it meant for us is the following. One is we upped the penalties for possessing hard alcohol, including for students who were of age. So we said, even if you're 21, you still cannot possess hard alcohol on campus. We introduced stronger penalties for our organizations, like our Greek houses, if they were caught with hard alcohol. And at the same time, we sort of lowered the penalties and the enforcement around beer and wine. So it was really kind of a sanctions enforcement move. And, I'm not naive. I know we have not eradicated the consumption of hard alcohol on campus, but I think you saw from the data that at least it's moved a lot. And, we were starting from a different point than you are. So, this was a move that for our campus clearly made a meaningful difference. But I appreciate, how hard it is and, that we all have to try what we can try. So thank you. Yeah. I can hear you. I don't know if the audience can. It doesn't sound...
I'll just talk loud.
Okay.
Jane Stapleton University. It's got a tremendous amount of technical what you might observe that many of the colleges are widely known oftentimes have egregious things that happen. Prevention. So I wonder if you could just talk about particularly how you're going to comprehensive one area that shadow all of this. I think again this is
Yeah, and was it Jean or Jane? Jane, and I know UNH has done amazing stuff, and so congratulations on what you've done.
Thank you. We're actually evaluating your four-year Dartmouth experience.
Excellent. So. Okay. Anyway.
I meant that in a very positive way, that we have the opportunity to evaluate something which we think is really amazing.
Right, well, I appreciate that. I wish I could say that we keep our eye on everyone on campus and know exactly what they're doing. But what you say is difficult. We do, at this point, we have these three initiatives. They're very complex. We want to make sure that they are mutually reinforcing in every possible way. So what we do have is regular meetings of the leadership of these initiatives to try to understand, what each of them is doing, what each of them is seeing or experiencing, and occasionally this is called for course correction in one of them because what they're doing is actually not helpful to what another group, one of the other initiatives is trying to accomplish. So I don't know if I give you a great answer, but we do try to monitor that the three very complex initiatives are working together, mutually supporting each other. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Professor Lynn Bose-Sperry from Western New England University. I study bystander intervention and identity threat. So the thing I'm wondering about, I don't study sexual assault. I'm more the ambiguous gray zone, not illegal part of sexual harassment. And a lot of times, especially men's identities become threatened because, yep, you're right, I'm just here ready to grab someone. If you don't deal with me, I'm just like totally out of control. Do you have mechanisms built in to deal with identity threat, resistance, and backlash?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And those are important things. And I would say we have not gotten to that level of sophistication in our thinking. I think those are very important things. They may be sort of inherent in some of the things we're doing, but they're not explicit in the way we think about.
Yeah, that's my one piece of advice is they need to be explicit because I also study organizational change. And change people are resistant to initially, and then when you have gender identity and threats like that thrown in, that's explaining, I think, what you called the recalcitrant Greek life, the ones that you had to shut down, thinking maybe it had something to do with that. But yeah, my one piece of advice is that's a central issue that gets underestimated.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Karen Gaines, Academic Dean at Embry-Riddle. This was alluded to a little bit yesterday, but and you talked about faculty today in your presentation, and some of my experiences as a student or a faculty member, chair, and dean is is seeing some of the individuals that you call out, and we know, and you did a great job in terms of dealing with those faculty members, but we know also as behind the scenes, when we get to the point where we're trying to deal with the situation, then sometimes those faculty members leave, and then they go on to the next institution, and we really have no mechanism between institutions to sort of alert and even some of those faculties will go to high school, and I've seen that. What are your thoughts about that and the broader discussion and how we can deal with that as institutions?
Yeah, so great question. It was Lynn, is that right?
Karen.
Karen,
Yeah.
Sorry. So Karen, thank you for that. Well, I certainly cannot dispute that we are far too casual in our sort of hiring practices. And I think, I guess my thoughts are that the hiring institution probably should take on the responsibility, as any hiring organization would, to look into the background of the people that they're hiring. I don't, I think it's probably, in the cases you're talking about, not too hard to find out what actually happened at the prior institution, but you got to ask. You got to try and find out. And so I think that we've instituted background checks for faculty hires recently, and it's kind of amazing that we did not have those before. We had them for staff, and but that. In addition to that, you really, when you hire a faculty member, should understand what's been going on at their prior institution. So I totally agree with that. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Katie Hood from the One Love Foundation. One question I have is about the on-campus social life versus off-campus social life issue, and whether there was unintended consequences of the ban pushing things off campus that used to take place on. And the second is the important role of alumni, and what did you have to do intentionally to sell to your alumni base that these changes needed to happen?
Okay, great questions. Thank you. So earlier you heard me say that what works for one campus may not work well for others. Dartmouth is in the kind of unique place that there basically is no off-campus. So there is almost no rental housing in the town of Hanover. The town of Hanover is, I'm sure, would never agree to zoning to build major residences off campus. So there really is almost no off-campus possibilities for our students. So they're kind of captive on our campus, which gives us a huge advantage in some ways with this work. I realize that's definitely not true of other campuses. We did, I mentioned earlier that if you look at the numbers of medical transports, they're about 50% of what they were before. The actual number of incidents, so incidents meaning where there's been some encounter with either an undergraduate residential advisor or with safety and security where alcohol is involved, those incidents have actually gone up over the last few years, and to us that suggests that in fact the drinking activities are not going underground. They're still as prevalent, but the levels of intoxication are much lower when they happen. So I think we've been very tuned into this because that was that point that you're just going to drive it all underground or off campus was made by many people, and so we've been trying to keep very close tabs on that. With alumni, that's really interesting you brought that up. When I went to Dartmouth, one of the myths I was told was that I couldn't touch the social scene, that the alumni would rise up and they would, not let you touch the Greek system or anything like that. It has been anything but that. The alumni have been the most supportive group for these efforts. And when I talk to alumni about this, they just say, we are so sick of seeing Dartmouth in the news for negative reasons. Thank you for doing something about this. So alumni have been a very, very pleasant surprise in supporting this work. Yeah.
Neil Malamuth from UCLA. President Hanlon, I certainly applaud the comprehensiveness of your initiatives and your emphasis on data. But I'm going to be somewhat politically incorrect by saying that, I've been very interested in the Dartmouth approach. My own research indicates that unless we focus on high-risk males and multiple factors, it's unlikely that we're going to change anything. And from what you've presented today, I believe the initiative has been 5 years or so already. I would have to say that the data are very disappointing. You yourself indicated that when it comes to sexual assault, the data don't show any changes, and there might even be some increase. The alcohol, you presented impressive data when it comes to hard liquor, but of course there could be substitutes. They could be getting drunk on more soft liquor, wine, and so forth, and you just mentioned the fact that indeed there's some consistency with that. I don't really, and you say it may take 10 more years. Well, you may be right, change doesn't occur fast, but normally you think 5 years is a pretty long span to at least hope to see some change. So give me some reason for optimism based on data that in fact all these comprehensive attempts are really having changes where it really counts.
Yeah, well, Neil, I am an optimist, and I believe completely in this work. I think that one thing that the one data point you didn't bring out was that, in fact, our medical transports and our medical transports with high blood alcohol content are also at about 50% of what they were prior to these interventions. So,
okay, but
you're right.
That's kind of...
Hang on a second.
I'm sorry.
So, you are correct. They may be getting, wildly intoxicated on other substances, but that does not seem to be the case based on medical transports. The house community system, I do think that's a major change in the culture and residence concept on our campus. It's been in place only 2 years now. The younger classes are embracing it. I think that's a reason for optimism. We will see. And so I'm not going to say this is easy or that, we have magic formulas, but we're trying.
Yeah. Again, I would have to be politically incorrect by saying you're kind of grasping at straws. The research indicates that alcohol consumption is an indirect, minor contribution in interaction with other risk factors. And you're telling me to focus on the fact that very extreme aspects of alcohol intoxication have gone down. That is something that may be meaningful in certain ways, but looking at the overall goal of reducing sexual assault, of really having interventions that work, I don't think that would be an appropriate piece of data to strongly indicate that there's been some sort of a change. But perhaps at another time we could talk more about it, but I would hope that indeed there will be greater success, but I would hope that you would also agree that perhaps we need to take somewhat different approaches, as the 5-year data don't indicate the kind of support we would have hoped. Thank you.
Hello, Charlene Sen from the University of Windsor. I didn't come up here to say this, but I just, in response to Neil's point, I actually think that individual level changes can be immediate and long-lasting, but that for those to show up in communities, those systems actually do, because there are so many moving parts, take much longer. And then when we actually think that we can move sexual assault rates on campus, like on the whole campus, in 5 years, that's very hopeful. And I don't actually think it's possible, even with the best prevention efforts on campus. I think it's going to take longer, so I just would disagree with Neil for a minute there. My question is actually not about prevention, which is what I do, but about an issue I'm seeing in terms of administration and our support for survivors on campuses. And that is about non-disclosure agreements. So this is related to what a previous speaker said,
Yep.
where particularly I understand in many ways why administrations have been tempted and do use them regularly, particularly when survivors pull out of the process or are unwilling to go forward because, for example, they are law students and know that this complaint against a law faculty will potentially affect their entire career. But then we are passing on our faculty, and certainly I've seen this happen multiple times, and to the point where when the university did check, like, why would a tenured professor leave their tenured position and come to want to work here? And they called the university the non-disclosure agreement. They just reiterated the years of spent in employment and did not say, because that was the part of the non-disclosure, when a faculty member was contacted back channel and did say that faculty member is now being sued and the university is not backing them up. So just, I wondered what your position is on non-disclosure agreements in relation to this full system change you're making.
Yeah, so thank you. It was Charlene, is that right? Yes. Yeah, thanks. So, no, I understand your concerns. I don't know that we have a formulated position. I will say that we entered into no agreement with the 3 faculty members in the incident I related. There was no non-disclosure. There was no payment as they left. There was no agreement of any kind. We were pursuing tenure revocation, and they chose to resign unconditionally. So, I take your point. I think that in the example you stated, where a hiring institution asks the previous place, what's the deal? And all they get is a stone wall of, here's how many years the person was here. That should be a signal in itself. Yeah, Jay.
Doctor, what can you tell us about your actual rate of incident, and what does the data indicate to you should be your next step in reducing it?
So the actual rate of incident of sexual assault?
And harassment, yes.
Yeah. So, again, we probably the best data we have is anonymous survey data. And the most recent survey data we have is 2017, I think. And I won't remember the numbers exactly. It put us, it was far too high. That's the first thing I would say. Put us in the middle of the sort of our peer set, or near, maybe even a little higher in our peer set. So I'm sorry, I don't have the number right on the top of my head, but it was way too high. That's for sure.
What does the data indicate to you, if anything, on what you should do next to reduce it?
Well, I sort of outlined the steps we're taking. We have a student administrative group, which is our engine for innovation. It's the Student Presidential Committee on Sexual Assault. It's a standing group. And it is their job to actually scour the landscape, try to figure out what are the innovations we should do. Each year they come up with some innovations. I would say, they have not seen anything that I would call sort of major in a few years, but we are always open to the best ideas. So I don't think I can say to you, here's the next thing we should do, because if I knew the next thing we should do, we would be doing it. But we're always looking for good ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ashley Blamey, Title IX Coordinator for the University of Tennessee. And you referenced the National Academy's report, which I would agree everyone should read. And you have implemented one of the things that I thought, for at least our campus, could be one of the greatest challenges. Can you talk about changing that hierarchy for graduate students and faculty, creating the group advising?
Yeah, so it was, you know, as you know, it was Ashley, was that right?
Ashley, yes.
Yeah, so Ashley, thanks. The sort of historical tradition is that you have a single advisor. And, you know, that creates an enormous power differential. The PhD student advisor relationship is about as stark a power differential as I can even imagine. You know, the whole future of the student is in this person's hands to some extent. So we decided, okay, we're going to have more of a committee structure in place, of which the primary advisor be a member, but not the only member, and that we laid down responsibilities for the committees, the extent to which they needed to interact with the student on a regular basis. We were lucky in that several of our units already had this in place, and so for those who said, you know, this is the end of the world, we could say, well, actually it's not. You know, the engineering school already does this. So I think that we just mandated it. We were fortunate in that we had this moment when, you know, the campus saw the stark reality of what could happen, and so it allowed us to do some things like this that I think will have a long-time effect. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Vicki Magley from the University of Connecticut, and I have been studying workplace incivility and sexual harassment for 25 years now, and I had the pleasure, the great honor, actually, of being one of the research experts on the NASM report.
Oh, great. Congratulations.
And so I'm really pleased to hear that you've accepted and adopted or working toward adopting all of the recommendations. I will say that just sitting in rooms like this really gives me the chills to see how progress is being made, and I so applaud all of your efforts. I also wanted to follow up on two of the recommendations and see how you are thinking about these two recommendations in particular, because I think they're some of the hardest to implement, and I'm just so curious to hear what you're doing with these. So the first of these is thinking about the escalating consequences that are associated with mistreatment and misconduct. So I think that in some of the criticism that's happening sort of in a public way right now for the Me Too movement, some of the criticism is really centered around it's, you know, in a backlash format, right? It's gone too far and this kind of thing. And I kind of agree in some ways, right? But I think it gets to this idea of how do we communicate escalating consequences? And I'd love to hear first how you're doing that. And then, just so I don't forget my second question, because I'm going to be overwhelmed in listening to your answer. But my second one, and so I'm going to throw it on you to remember, right?
Okay. Okay, Vicki. All right.
The second one is how are you at Dartmouth trying to incorporate performance appraisals for faculty around respectful treatment? And how do you try to integrate for faculty who historically have only been evaluated on research, teaching, and service, how do you incorporate interpersonal actions in their annual performance appraisals?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Vicki. I'm glad we're getting to the softball questions. But actually, congratulations on the work you did on the report. It's an amazing report.
Thank you.
And so the first question, the escalating consequences, remind me what you mean by that.
So so much of the backlash right now is this idea that, you know, you touch somebody, you look at somebody wrong, and suddenly you're fired.
Oh, I see.
Which
Okay.
is not at all what's happening, but I think in the media, the way that it's being portrayed in the media is that, you know, one strike and you're out. And so how do we communicate in our communities, in our universities and institutions of higher education, and that you might make a mistake. People make mistakes. And how do we actually encourage those hard conversations those hard corrective conversations so that we don't lose people who are otherwise excellent contributors to our communities, and yet we're still able to address the issues. One of the concerns that happens, I think, a lot of times for Title IX, when complaints get into the Title IX world, is that it has to meet some kind of bar. It might have to meet some kind of a bar for a legal action, but that doesn't mean that it has to reach that bar for a corrective action. And so how do we work that corrective, those escalating consequences into actually correcting even what could be viewed as pretty minor types of things to try to create change?
Yeah, okay, I get it. So that's a great question. And, we certainly, there is discussion on our campus about escalating consequences. Oh my God, I can't have a female student working with me anymore, and I would say at this point,
I'm sorry to interject, but that's sexist and discriminatory, right? So
I understand
that's a
that,
big problem, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah.
No, I understand that. But what I would say is, it's really at this point not gone beyond just talk. So I haven't seen behavior change, and we do, we have discussed this with the deans and say, are you seeing anything? Are you seeing any changes that are tangible? So right now it has not gone beyond talk. In terms of the corrective part, that's a great question. I had an example of that recently where a staff person who works with someone who reports to me came to me and said, I'm worried they're misogynistic. And the good news is that together we talked about it, and she went and spoke to him, and his behavior has changed. I think what I'm getting to is that I think just the launching of these initiatives, the attention paid to it by leadership, saying this is important, has in fact emboldened campus and conversations in a good way. We haven't done anything systematic to address escalating consequences, but I think it is not just the fact that we're talking about this and taking action has already led to positive change.
Absolutely.
Your second question was
right,
the faculty members and how they're evaluated.
Yes.
Right.
Well done.
Yeah. And so again, you're right that the traditional things that we evaluate faculty on have been their teaching first, and mentoring, their research, also very important. Service a little less so, but part of the evaluation. I don't think I've got an answer for you that we've, in some systematic way introduced support for positive culture change as part of the evaluation. I do think that it's part of the mentoring part that we evaluate, for sure. But it's something to think about and something worth trying to see if there's a way to do it. So I agree with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Or Vicki, sorry.
Vicky,
sorry.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Mike Nadeski, the Title IX coordinator from Elon University. I have two questions. First, thank you very much for your time and sharing all of this. You talk about the sort of catalyst for your actions, the expose in Rolling Stone, the issue that's been highlighted in the Chronicle. What advice do you have for institutions that clearly see this as a problem, maybe similar behaviors, social climate, things like that, that don't have that catalyst, that make your alumni angry, that will then support you? How do we go about and make that argument when we're fighting that myth, that where we don't have something to point to say we need to fix this? And the second question, from your training and education in making it mandatory, how are you implementing that, particularly with tenure track faculty?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So thank you for those questions, Mike. And my first advice is get ahead of it before you're in the Rolling Stone. That's good. But I think what I'd come back to is the third point here. You actually have more allies in this than you may feel like you do. So my guess is if you move forward with this and you explain to your alumni, explain to your students why you're doing this, what you're trying to prevent, what you've seen at other campuses, that they'll understand. They'll be mostly supportive, almost entirely supportive. Even if they're not shouting it, they will be. So the enforcement part is, it's still being worked on by the deans, but the most likely enforcement mechanism is that a person will not be eligible for a merit increase without having completed this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Hanlon. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Ariel Baker. I'm actually a current Dartmouth graduate student.
Oh, hi, Ariel.
Doing my PhD in neuroscience.
Okay.
I'm currently serving as a Merzion Science Policy Fellow at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So I've had the unique opportunity of working with the group that produced the sexual harassment report, and then also simultaneously seeing it being implemented by you and the Dartmouth community. I'm particularly interested in the department climate surveys. I think that is much needed, and I understand that there's a lot of variability across departments. So I'm interested to hear sort of your timeline for those surveys and what you plan to do with the data to change the culture within the departments.
Yeah, Ariel, thanks for the questions and thanks for your work on the National Academy's report, which again, I'll say one more time, is a great report. If you haven't read it, you ought to read it. The time frame is the first two are underway right now. And it's the Department of Geography and the Department of Microbiology and Immunology in the Geisel School. Abby has been to campus. She visited us, I think, last week before. She's helping get this launched. We are, for the first two, following her recommended methodology exactly, because she said, give this a try. Abby, as you may know, has consulted with literally hundreds of institutions across the country on this topic. She is, I think, the most experienced person in this nation on departmental climate reviews and academic departmental reviews. So we really respect that success and experience, and so we're following her methodology exactly. And the goal is that we want to create the expertise and staffing in-house so that we will then continue these on. That's what I can tell you right now.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, good. I think I've exhausted all your questions, and thank you so much for your attention. Much. All right.
All right, we're right on time. We will take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10 o'clock. Thank you.